thank you, Dan and Cher, for this opportunity to share what I have been looking into. It's the record of the man born blind from John chapter 9. And if you remember 2 weeks ago, Dan taught about Jesus at the Feast of Tabernacles from John 7. You can turn there to John chapter 7. That's where we'll start. John 7 and 8 show us the environment and the background that the man born blind was in. In his teaching, Dan referred to Albert Edersheim's book, The Temple, Its Ministry and Service as They Were at the Time of Jesus Christ. I was so thankful to hear his teaching because I had heard of the ceremonies during the Feast of Tabernacles, but I couldn't find any reference or any historical record outside the Bible that documented them. And so would not have been sharing on those tonight with you if it wasn't for Dan's teaching. So thank you again, Dan, for teaching that. Yes. In his teaching, Dan, oh wait, I did that part. Wait, sorry. So let's start here in John chapter 7. We see Jesus is in Galilee, and he knows the Jews in Jerusalem want to kill him. That's in verse 1. It's almost time for the Feast of Tabernacles. That's in verse 2. His brothers are heading to Jerusalem for the feast and prod Jesus to go too. That's in verses 3 and 4. They don't believe in him. Verse 5. Jesus goes in secret. Verse 10. In the middle of the 7-day feast, Jesus goes to the temple to teach. That's in verse 14. The Pharisees send officers to take him. Verse 32. But they don't. Verse 45. Let's look at verse 37. In the last day, that great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried, saying, If any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. He that believeth on me, as the scripture has said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. Albert Edersheim explained in his book that the first and last day of the Feast of Tabernacles was a Sabbath day. Dan went into great detail about this first great ceremony, the pouring out of the water. When I heard about it, they called it the water ceremony. And that's probably why I couldn't find anything about it. If you remember, Dan explained, while the morning sacrifice was being prepared, a priest, accompanied by a joyous procession with music, went down to the pool of Siloam and drew water into a golden pitcher. Because this last day and therefore a Sabbath, Edersheim said the water was drawn from the pool of Siloam the day before because that was considered work. Edersheim writes of this last day. He says, it was on that day, and for the last time, the priest with a golden pitcher poured its contents onto the base of the altar. After the Hallels had been sung, the people responding and worshiping as the priests 3 times drew the threefold blast from their silver trumpets. Just when the interest of the people had been raised to its highest pitch, a voice was raised which resounded through the temple, startling the multitude and carried fear and hatred to the hearts of their leaders. It was Jesus who stood and cried, saying, If any man thirsts, let him come unto me and drink. Then, by faith in him, should each one truly become like the pool of Siloam, and from his innermost being, rivers of living water flows. This significance of the rite in which they had just taken part was not only fully explained, but the mode of its fulfillment pointed out. So that's the ceremony of the pouring out of the water. The second great ceremony of the Feast of Tabernacles is the temple illumination, or as I heard of it, the light ceremony. From Albert Edershine's book, he writes, at the close of the first day of the feast, the worshippers descended to the court of the women, where great preparation had been made. 4 golden candelabras were there, each with 4 golden bowls, and against them rested 4 ladders, and 4 youths of priestly descent held each a pitcher of oil, from which they filled each bowl. The old worn girdles of the priests served for the wicks to these lamps. There was not a court in Jerusalem that was not lit up by the lights of the temple. I just said this word. How come I have a hard time now? Illumination. There we go. Illumination. Now, you would have been able to see this for miles and miles. Remember, the first day was a Sabbath. Their day started at sunset. So the end of the first day would be the end of that Sabbath day. And they could have this temple illumination ceremony then. Also, the last day was a Sabbath. So the feast would end at sunset, and there would not then be a light ceremony. But Eldersheim said Jesus points to it. Let's look in John 8, verse 12. John 8, verse 12. Then Jesus spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Jesus is pointing to the temple illumination ceremony. It wasn't happening at that time in the temple because it was the last day, and the Feast of Tabernacles was over at sunset. Continuing in John chapter 8, Jesus is teaching in the temple in verse 20, and we'll look at verse 59. Then took they up stones to cast at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so passed by. Let's look at the next verse, which will be John 9, 1. And as Jesus passed by, right there, it is a direct continuation. So let's read this record through, and then we'll go back and go and highlight some points. So John chapter 9, verse 1. And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. I must work the works of him that sent me, while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay, and said unto him, Go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. He went his way, therefore, and washed, and came seeing. The neighbors, therefore, and they which before had seen him, that he was blind, said, Is not this he that sat and begged? And some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. But he said, I am he. Therefore said they unto him, How were thine eyes opened? And he answered and said, A man that is called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes, and said unto me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And I went and washed, and I received sight. Then said they unto him, Where is he? And he said, I know not. Okay, so let's go back to verse 3. Verse 3 is awkward. The original did not have any punctuation. He was not sick for the glory of God. He was healed for the glory of God. Without punctuation, it reads, Neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. I must work the works of him that sent me. So Jesus is saying, no, it was neither that this man sinned or his parents, but in order that the work of God might be displayed in him. This man's blindness has nothing to do with sin. It's not an opportunity for religious debate. The issue is, what am I going to do about it? Verse 5, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. This is what Jesus said in the temple, referring to the temple illumination ceremony. Let's go back to verse 2. How did they know this man was born blind? He didn't have a sign around his neck. What would a man born blind look like? How would you always know this man was born blind? Even from the first time that you saw him, how would you know that he was born blind? Well, what did you say?
He had no eyes.
He had no eyes. Yes. Yep.
Is that right?
Yes, it is.
I mean, no
He had-
eyeballs?
He had no eyeballs. We'll continue here. In that day and time, you wouldn't live long if you had an injury where you lost an eye and had an empty socket. But if you didn't have eyeballs, but skin covered your empty sockets, you would be safe from infection and would be known as born blind. Let's look at verses 8 and 9. The neighbors, therefore, and they which before had seen him, that he was blind, said, Is not this he that sat and begged? And some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. But he said, I am he. They didn't recognize him. Why didn't they recognize him? This didn't happen to any other person that Jesus healed that was blind. Only him. And think how different he would look with eyeballs. His whole face would look different. Instead of two sunken in, skin covered areas, he had eyeballs. He was looking back at them.
Oh.
Now let's look at what Jesus does. In verse 6, when he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with clay. When was the last time that anything compared to this happened? How about Genesis 2, when God took the clay of the earth and made a human body? Jesus always did what he saw his Father do, John 5:19. And he saw his Father make eyeballs for this man out of clay. This man didn't ask for healing, but Jesus saw him. Verse 1. Did he have faith for healing? Let's see if we can find out. The Pharisees questioned him twice. Verses 27 through 34. Jesus answered that, or I'm sorry, not Jesus. He answered them, the blind man that now can see. Okay, he answers the Pharisees. I have told you already, and ye did not hear me. Wherefore would ye hear it again? Will ye also be his disciple? Then they reviled him and said, Thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spake unto Moses. As for this fellow, we know not where hence he is. And the man answered and said unto them, Why, wherein is a marvelous thing, that ye know not where hence he is, and yet he has opened mine eyes. Now we know that God heareth not sinners, But if any man be a worshiper of God and doeth his will, him he heareth. Since the world began, was it not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind? If this man were not of God, he could do nothing. They answered and said unto him, Thou wast altogether born in sin, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out. This man knew that since the beginning of the world, no man born blind was healed. He must have sought healing and been told, no, it's not possible. It sounds like he had a history with them, and he is not intimidated by them at all. And he knows he will be cast out if he was healed on the Sabbath. And now he's siding with Jesus. It's not looking good for him. But he can see, and he doesn't care. And they tell him what he has heard so many times before. Thou wast altogether born in sin. Let's go back and look at verse 1 again. Okay. John 9, verses 1 through 5. And as Jesus passed by, he saw him, which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents? See, many times at that time, they thought that sickness was because of individual personal sins, if you couldn't be healed. And so I'm sure this man heard this over and over. And here the disciples are talking about him right in front of him, like he's not even there. And Jesus answered, Neither has this man sinned nor his parents, but the works of God should be made manifest in him. I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Jesus saw this man at the temple on the last day of this very important feast. And watch. The disciples, ask about this whole thing, but Jesus says something that this man has never heard before. Neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be displayed in him. I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. And the night cometh when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. It was the first time he heard someone confidently say they could do something about this. Those words of truth broke off years of unbelief that healing was not possible. He may have heard Jesus say those very words from the temple, I am the light of the world. You can tell he had faith that was unencumbered because he let someone put mud in his eye sockets where eyeballs should have been. And he followed Jesus' instructions perfectly. Surely he knew of the temple illumination ceremony, even though he had never seen it. His heart must have leaped when Jesus told him to go and wash in the pool of Siloam, knowing the significance of the priests drawing water from there for the altar all through the feast. He may have known that the spit from a holy man was thought to have healing properties. I wanted to find, because I never knew where it was in the Old Testament, where it said that the Messiah would heal a man born blind. So I wanted to document it and find it. But as Wendy pointed out a few weeks ago, and thank you for pointing this out, because I don't know if I would be sharing this if you hadn't pointed out, things that we think are in the Bible aren't necessarily really there. And so this is what it does say. And Jesus quoted some of these verses to show that healing the blind was one of the signs prophesied of the Messiah. In Psalm 146, verse 8, the Lord openeth the eyes of the blind. Isaiah 29:18, the eyes of the blind shall see. Isaiah 35:5, then the eyes of the blind shall be opened. Isaiah 42:7, to open the eyes of the blind. Isaiah 42:18, blind that ye may see. In Isaiah 61:1, it doesn't say recovering the sight to the blind, but Jesus adds it to Luke 4:18 when he quotes the beginning of that verse. That's not all I found. There are articles saying the Old Testament does not contain any accounts of individual beings healed of physical blindness in the Old Testament. No healing of blind until Jesus. But technically, I found one. And it's up to you whether you want to count it or not, okay? But it's the record in 2 Kings chapter 6, 15 through 20, where Elijah asked God to open his servant's eyes so that he can see the host of God's horses and chariots compassed around them. But we know that that's spiritual eyes, of course. He wasn't physically blind. But Elijah then asked God to blind the attacking Syrian army, and he does. Elijah leads them to Samaria and asks God for their sight to be returned, and it does. So technically, that's healing blind, but they weren't blind of natural causes. Like everyone that Jesus healed in the Gospels was blind because of natural, not supernatural. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the prophecy of the Messiah healing the blind was huge, huge. And the Pharisees knew it. It wasn't just the Messiah would heal someone born blind. The Messiah would heal the blind. And the Pharisees knew it, and this man born blind knew it. And John the Baptist would have known it too. That's why Jesus answered John's messengers in Matthew 11 and Luke 7. He said, among other things, the blind receive their sight, the blind see. John would have known without any more question that, yes, he is the Messiah. I want to close with seeing this man's heart. And while I read it, notice how differently he speaks to Jesus than he spoke to those Pharisees. John 9, verse 35. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said unto him, dost thou believe on the Son of God? And he answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I may believe on him? And Jesus said unto him, thou hast both seen him, and it is he that talketh with thee. And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. And Jesus said, for judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind. This man could see more blind than the Pharisees, who thought they were the only ones who could see, but they were so terribly blind. So thank you. That's what I wanted to share.
Mm.
Yay.
Great.
Beautiful record.
Yeah,
Thank you.
good job.
Good job, yeah.
One of the things I thought about, Lisa, can you hear me? Let me move up. One of the things I thought about is, you said that Jesus was in the temple when he met the man born blind. And the
He came
temple,
out of the temple. He came out of the temple.
he was just come out of the temple, right? So,
Mhm.
the temple is on a, high mountain, and the pool of Siloam is at the bottom. And there's, I don't know how many stairs. Do you remember how many stairs? Like a lot of stairs.
Yeah.
that they have to go through from the Pool of Siloam to get up to the temple. So not only he put the spittle on up at the temple, he said, you got to go down to the Pool of Siloam, which is a really long journey down. So he probably would have needed help unless he was, he had some sort of guide to get down those stairs to get to the Pool of Siloam and wash. I mean, it would have been a little period of time for that to happen. It wasn't like I just, can go over to the basin and wash.
Right.
So he did have to have believing because he did that long trek in order to go wash. And he
Yep.
wasn't seeing until he washed.
Right.
So
Exactly.
yeah. So definitely he was believing, especially when he got down there. And I think I recall that when they would go at least up the stairs, maybe down, I don't know, they would recite a psalm, and every verse in that particular psalm represents a step that goes up to the temple from the Pool of Siloam.
Yeah, shared that one time, and it is in Albert Endersheim's book that it is part of the temple illumination ceremony. But I left it out for time, and I didn't need to, because but it is the Psalms. I don't have it written down, but it's the Psalm. What is it? Share 100 and
I don't know right off.
yeah, I don't know what right off either. But when they went from the temple to go down into the woman's court, it was 15 steps, and they did those 15 Psalms there. So this is something that it looks like that they did this reciting of those 15 Psalms in different areas of the temple at different times.
So most likely he would have recited those psalms as he was going down to wash.
Maybe I don't know. He definitely, it looks like the way he was talking to the Pharisees and knowing that nobody had been born blind, that he was learned in some way. He must have had people reading to him, or he was at the temple a lot and heard a lot.
Hmm.
Probably a little pissed that, just now all of a sudden you can see and they grab him to take him in front of the Pharisees. It's like, yeah, I got something to say to them. And interesting how the first thing they do is when they can't refute what's happening, they accuse him of being a sinner.
Yeah.
The top religion is the accuser jumped right in there.
Yeah.
I just looked up some information. It said the road connecting the Temple Mount to the Pool of Siloam, known as the Pilgrimage Road, is a stepped street. The total distance is about a quarter mile, so that's 1,600 feet or 600 meters. There's an elevation gain of 375 feet from the pool to the temple. According to archaeologists, the Pool of Siloam itself has a stairway of 34 rock-hewn steps leading up from a court in front of the pool. Excavations have also revealed 3 sets of 5 stairs leading down into the pool along its 160-foot length. So
Yeah.
It was quite a trek, you were right.
Yeah. And there was other places that he could have washed on the way there, and he didn't. He obeyed Jesus.
No, that's a big point.
I got to tell you, for all the times I've read this record, I never once considered that the man didn't have eyeballs.
Right?
Not once. Is that in Edersheim? Does he?
No.
No.
I heard that from another teaching. But I took away from some of the stuff that they said that I didn't make sense or agree with, and added the whole thing about he did have faith. I mean, if you really dig into that record, you can see he heard the words of Jesus. Those were words that he had never heard of in his whole life, that anybody would say, I'm going to do something about this. All he heard was, it can't be done. It can't be done. And that had to he had the faith, and it just broke off all that unbelief that was just holding that faith down, just broke it off.
You had mentioned, Leesa, that they considered a holy man's spit as having healing in it. And when Jesus spit, he would have heard that.
I know.
He
I
couldn't
know.
see that. He couldn't see what was going on, but he would have heard that.
Absolutely. And
You know,
it
so
had to
I'm
have been a
sure.
lot. It had to have been a
Um,
lot to make enough, you know?
yeah, so that would have been,
Uncle Ludi.
yeah. Well,
Exactly.
would have meant something to him. Like I said, there's no miracle is a formula. It's unique to the individual and so unique to him. Did a great job on that. I love the whole illumination and
Yeah.
the pouring out of the water and, they can't do it on the Sabbath. So they had to, be prepared the day before and,
Yeah.
that whatever was going on according to, the temple and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, Jesus Christ complemented it by really living the word. He was the light. You can have all this light, but here's the light. Here's the light. Just amazing. You did a beautiful job on that.
Thank
Yeah.
you. But do you see how it, you could still, share it and everything, but without having the background of chapter 7 and 8 with the ceremonies, it just, you gotta have the ceremonies. And so I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I wasn't at that fellowship because I had a busy day that day. And Dan quickly got it online. And I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, saw it was there, listened to it. And I was so excited. I just couldn't believe out of nowhere, Dan shares this book that I need to know about. And yeah, I didn't get back to sleep. No, I was up from then on. Yeah, because I use archive.com at different times for different books. And so I got right on, man. I had to see if he also handled the light ceremony. And so then I was just ecstatic. Yeah. So
Lisa, I often wondered why Jesus Christ put clay on that man's eyes, because I don't know if he did it in any other healing of the eyes, but immediately when you mentioned how do you think he was blind, I just figured he had films on his eyes, and but the concept of not having eyeballs, I was blown away when you said that. I was like, what? Like, you didn't, I was muted so you couldn't hear me. I was like, blip, 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 no eyeballs.
But it makes sense, right?
And say it again.
It makes sense though, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I was like, wow. And then when you made the correlation of the clay for the eyeballs, and then how God used the clay, the dust of the ground, to make our bodies, I was like, wow, that was very wonderfully done. Well done, Lisa. Thank you.
Well, I wasn't, you're very welcome. I wasn't the one that came up with it. It's actually from a series of teachings that I shared that with Michael and Billy Joe, and you should have seen their faces when I told them he was born with no eyes. And they were like, what? And so they had to get right out and hear the series. So, but that series, he showed no faith. He didn't get the part where this man actually heard what Jesus was saying, and that's where his faith was released from. So yeah, but Eileen, yeah, it's not in any other record where he healed eyes. So in Matthew 9, it's two blind men, and Jesus touches their eyes.
That's
In
right.
Mark 8, they bring a blind man to him, and he let him out of town, spit on his eyes, and put his hands on him, and then asked him if he could see. And he saw men walking as trees. So that he had eyesight before. And he put his hands on him again, and told him to look up, and that's when he gained his sight. The third one is Matthew 12. It's one possessed with a devil, blind and dumb,
Uh-huh.
and he heals him. He just heals him.
Mm.
And then 4, a certain man blind, and Jesus says, "Your faith has saved you." And I believe
Mm.
that's the same record as Mark 10, where it's blind Bartimaeus, because there also Jesus says, "Thy faith has made thee whole." And the fifth one is Matthew 20, where it's 2 blind men and Jesus touches their eyes. And the sixth
Mm.
one is John 9. This is the one, a man born blind, and we know what happened there. The seventh one is Matthew 15, and this is a bunch. This is where Jesus departed from Galilee and went up to the mountain and sat down, and a great multitude came to him, and those that were lame, blind, dumb, maimed, and many others were healed. And the blind see. And that's the same with the eighth one. It's blind and lame came to him at the temple, and he healed them. So we have no idea how many blind people were actually healed during his ministry, but there was a lot of them because there was a huge need. Nobody had been healed of blindness up to that point.
Wow, I like
Fantastic.
Jesus as my optometrist.
What'd you say, Deborah?
I said I would rather have Jesus as my optometrist.
Oh, yes. Yes.
2020.
Deborah.
Well, I'm thinking about my eye doctor. I told him, because I have a cataract, and he said, "Well, are you thinking about surgery yet?" And I said, "Well, I have some protocols I think I'm going to try." And he laughed me to scorn. And I'm like, "Well, Lord, I would love to be healed and go back and say, well, this is what God can do." Because I know he can, but anyway.
Yep. I've had cataract surgery on both eyes.
Yeah.
I had, and that was years ago. I just all of a sudden got one, and the doctor looked at it and he said, "This is a fast growing one. It needs to be removed now." And he looked at the other eye and he goes, "There's one there too. And if I remove this one, 6 months later, I'm going to have to remove this one. So we'll just do both of them, and the insurance will cover it." And so I was thankful that,
Oh, awesome.
yeah.
That's great.
So
But-
I also had never heard that the man didn't have eyes, but I looked it up on Google, and under biblical hermeneutics, HERMENEUTICS, it says that. It talks about the man's blindness in John 9, and it says several times that he didn't have eyes.
Yeah, there you go.
Just amazing.
Makes sense though, doesn't it? I
It
mean, it fits
does.
everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Never thought
And
about
it would have been just as wonderful if he had eyeballs that didn't see if he were born blind with eyes that didn't see, but the fact that he created eyeballs in him, well, there you go.
Yeah. But that wouldn't answer the fact, how would everybody know that he was the man born blind? How would they know if he had eyeballs that he couldn't see? They wouldn't necessarily know that just by looking at him.
Well, I mean, Eileen said earlier, if you've ever seen a picture of a blind person, their iris is white.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure that many of the people that Jesus healed had eyes like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
he was unrecognized.
So you're saying, how would people know that he was born blind?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. That's the difference. Okay.
Yeah.
So you might not have had eyelashes and stuff either.
Right. He probably didn't. But boy, he did after Jesus got done with him. I'm sure he had eyelashes. So it was just skin. There was no slit, there was no opening because he was an adult now. If there was any opportunity for infection, he wouldn't have lived. He wouldn't have lived to be an adult. And remember, his parents said, when questioned by the Pharisees, his parents said, he's an adult, ask him how he got to see.
How to get those details, huh? Pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a great detail. I really like that. Enjoy it.
Wow, that is deep.
Thanks. Thanks, Dan. You contributed. I just picked up where you left off.
All right.
Well, I just had a thought, if he was, okay, so he was born blind and he couldn't see and he got healed. And if he had eyeballs and he got healed, the Pharisees or the Sadducees could have made something up. Like he had eyeballs and somehow, whatever, they were so full of lies anyway. But not having eyes and now having eyes, that's a whole different horse of a different color.
Yeah, it sure is.
To fulfill that prophecy because they were so aware of that prophecy. So there was no doubt that what got healed was he put something there that wasn't there before.
Right. And that is like, it doesn't say in the Old Testament that the Messiah would heal somebody that was born blind, but they knew it. They knew it. This man knew. Nobody since the beginning of the world has anybody born blind ever been healed. So, God worked that out, like that they knew. Somehow they kept watch of that and they knew. So nobody's ever been healed, born blind, and here Jesus does it.
Something else, Leesa, that kind of struck me a little bit was he had boldness with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, whoever the religious leaders that he was talking to. That didn't sound like common man.
Yeah, I know.
To me.
Yeah.
That sounded like, he had parents, so he had a family, there was somebody that could care for him. He didn't sound like the guy off the street that would have been cowering.
Yeah.
In front
I
of
know.
the Sadducees, the Pharisees, like his parents were. They were afraid.
Mhm.
But he
Yes.
was.
Right.
So, either he was not common man, he was really built up by what's happening, but he sounded like a very interesting individual.
Oh, absolutely. Very interesting. And as I was working this, I remember a record or a teaching or something that there was one man that was healed in the Gospels that was in the book of Acts. And does anybody remember anything like that of a carryover? And I was just wondering if it was him. And I didn't have time to search it out or anything, but
So he was spoken of in the Book of Acts.
say that again.
What was the statement you said to begin with?
So I remember a teaching or at some point at some time where somebody that was healed in the Gospels that Jesus healed was still alive and was in the book of Acts. Or he comes up, he pops up in the book of Acts.
Well, Lazarus would have been.
Oh, yeah. But I don't think it was Lazarus. And I was wondering if it was blind Bartimaeus, that kind of, I was thinking, but it would have been cool if it was this guy. What a testimony. What a testimony. Yep. So, well, I'm glad you didn't think I was crazy.
We've known you too long to think that.
Yeah, but I tell you, I would not, if Dan had not shared that book, I would not have shared that first part. And if Wendy hadn't shared things that we think in the Bible aren't always in the Bible, I don't know if I would have had enough confidence to share that. So I thank you too, Wendy. You guys really helped me do this. So
I'll help each other, don't we?
yeah.
Right.
And
Oh,
you were
really?
really walking with God. You were
And-
really
and
walking with
Cher
God.
taught
that you-
on-
Go ahead.
And Cher taught on the steps, going up the Pool of Siloam up to
Yeah.
the temple.
Mm-hmm.
Great example of iron sharpeneth iron.
Yeah.
Well, this
And
thing you take-
It's
the body
working together.
yes, and it's you guys listening to God and saying those things and coming up with that book right at the right time, because it was just it was when Wendy taught that night that you had asked if I would share, and I came on early and said yes I would, and knew what I was gonna, because God was working this on my heart to share this record. And that was the night that Wendy shared things that you think are in the Bible might not be. You know, and I was like, oh, I really can do this. Yeah. So, anyways, I'm thankful. I'm glad that you liked it. And yeah. So I guess I'll just have a word of prayer unless anybody has anything else that they want to say or share or anything.